Raphael was one of the greatest artists the world has ever known, celebrated for his masterpieces that defined the Renaissance. But what if the truth behind his untimely death at just 37 was not the result of a simple fever, as history suggests? Imagine the shock when the fever that supposedly took his life might have been something far more sinister. Was Raphael, revered for his genius, simply a victim of his own fame, or was something darker at play? Let's explore the mystery surrounding his death and uncover the possibilities that have remained hidden for centuries. At the peak of his success, Raphael was more than just an artist. He was an architect, a painter, and an influential figure in Rome, working on some of the most significant commissions of the time. His work, especially the Sistine Madonna and the Raphael rooms in the Vatican, earned him the admiration of the most powerful figures of the era, including popes and kings. But his death in 1520 left many unanswered questions. Most accounts suggest Raphael succumbed to a fever, a seemingly simple explanation for a tragic loss. It seemed natural for the young artist to fall ill and pass away, just as many before him had succumbed to such sickness. But there are whispers of a different story. Some suggest that the fever Raphael allegedly suffered from wasn't due to any natural cause, but rather the result of a life spent indulging in excess. It was said that Raphael's lifestyle, filled with late nights and amorous escapades, had caught up with him. Could this fever have been the final blow after a life of excess and indulgence? However, another theory casts an even darker shadow over his death. In the volatile political climate of Renaissance Italy, Raphael was no stranger to rivalry. As his fame grew, so did the number of people who saw him as a threat. Could one of these rivals have taken drastic measures to end Raphael's life? Some historians and scholars have proposed that Raphael was poisoned, a possibility that seems all the more plausible when you consider the dangerous world of art and politics in which he thrived. Let's think about it for a moment. Raphael was not just an artist, he was a political figure, navigating the dangerous waters of patronage, competition, and influence. In such an environment, jealousy and animosity were common, and it wasn't uncommon for rivals to use poison as a weapon. Could Raphael's fame have made him a target, someone who was in the way of a more ambitious competitor or a powerful patron? The idea that Raphael's death could have been a result of foul play suddenly doesn't seem so far-fetched, but the mystery deepens when we consider the accounts of those who were closest to him. Some biographers have suggested that Raphael's death came at an oddly convenient time, just as he was finishing his major works. What if his death wasn't just the result of illness or excess, but an orchestrated event, timed to silence him before he could achieve even greater things? Perhaps Raphael's genius was viewed as too dangerous, too influential, and thus, his untimely death was a way to keep him from surpassing even greater figures of the era. The idea of him being silenced, not just by his illness but by the hands of those who sought to maintain power, adds a layer of intrigue to this mystery. Let's take a moment to consider a fact that often goes overlooked in Raphael's death. While his death was attributed to a fever, no one really knows what caused the fever. There's no definitive record of the illness, no examination of his symptoms. Could this be a clue that suggests his death was not what it appeared to be? In the Renaissance, medical knowledge was still in its infancy, and a fever could easily be misdiagnosed or deliberately misrepresented. So was it really a fever that killed Raphael, or did something else take his life? A carefully disguised act of betrayal? Now, there's one more part of this story that leaves us questioning everything we thought we knew about Raphael's death. The timing of it all is uncanny. Raphael passed away in April, and just days after his death, his works continued to be celebrated. His legacy was secured by those who admired him, and in the aftermath, it became clear that his influence would last long beyond his years. But the question still lingers. What if Raphael had lived longer? Could his death have been a calculated act, one designed to ensure his legacy remained just as powerful, but without him grown too powerful? After all, a dead artist is an idealized artist, untouched by time's cynicism and capable of becoming immortal. The death of Raphael, whether by illness, excess, or something darker, remains one of the great mysteries of Renaissance history. And while we may never know the true cause of his death, one thing is certain: the story behind his demise is far more complex than most would have you believe. The fact that we're still debating it today speaks to the power of Raphael's legacy and the intrigue that surrounds his life and death. But as we move forward, we'll uncover more stories like this one, each with its own twists and turns, each with its own mysterious deaths that leave us questioning the reality of what we've been told. Just like Raphael, many Renaissance figures met their end under mysterious circumstances, and as we peel back the layers, we'll reveal even more shocking truths. Keep watching, because the deeper we go, the more we'll discover about the untold stories of the Renaissance, stories that still captivate our imaginations to this day. Lorenzo de Medici was a man who wielded unimaginable power during the Italian Renaissance, a patron of the arts whose influence reached across Europe. He wasn't just a ruler, he was a symbol of wealth, sophistication, and intellectual progress. But in 1492, just as his reign seemed invincible, Lorenzo fell gravely ill and died suddenly. Could Lorenzo de Medici's death have been something more sinister than what history has told us? At the time, Lorenzo was known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, and his role in shaping the Renaissance was unparalleled. He had built an empire not just in the world of finance, but in the cultural cultural world as well, attracting artists like Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and Botticelli to his court. The world of Florence was at his feet, and his power seemed unshakable. Yet, in the blink of an eye, this powerful figure was gone. His sudden illness and death raised eyebrows. Was it natural, or was there something more at play? Most historians attribute Lorenzo's death to a fever, a vague description that has never fully satisfied the curious minds who have examined it. Some say it was the result of a long-standing illness. Others claim that it was merely the result of a weakened constitution. But the fact that his decline was so rapid and his death came so quickly left many to wonder if something darker was involved. Fever, after all, can be a symptom of numerous conditions, but could it have been something more dangerous than just illness? What if Lorenzo was poisoned? It's not as far-fetched as it may seem. In the fiercely competitive world of Renaissance Italy, betrayal and murder were often part of the political landscape. Florence was not a place for the faint-hearted. The Medici family itself had been embroiled in numerous power struggles and feuds. The rivals of the Medici family were many, and not all of them were willing to play by the rules. Could a political rival have orchestrated a slow, methodical poisoning to rid themselves of Lorenzo? If we dig deeper into the political intrigue of the time, there's reason to believe that Lorenzo's death may have been more than just a natural tragedy. The Medici family had its fair share of enemies, wealthy families, rival banking dynasties, and the powerful factions in Rome who were always looking to take down the Medici influence. Poisoning wasn't just a secret weapon used in Italy, it was a political tool of the Renaissance. A slow-acting poison, administered over days or weeks, could have easily gone unnoticed until it was too late. Perhaps what makes this theory so compelling is the fact that Lorenzo's death came at a time of political upheaval. The Medici family was still reeling from the aftermath of the Pazzi conspiracy of 1478, a failed attempt to assassinate Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano during Easter Mass. Despite the failure of that plot, Lorenzo had made enemies who saw his reign as a threat to their own power. Could someone have decided that the only way to eliminate that threat was through a more covert method? But there's more to this story. Lorenzo's sudden death left his heirs vulnerable, and within a year of his passing, the political climate in Florence began to shift. His son Piero de' Medici was left in charge, but he was far less able and far more prone to missteps than his father. Could Lorenzo's death have been time to clear the way for those who would eventually weaken the Medici family's grip on power? Was there a coordinated effort to bring about Lorenzo's fall, paving the way for those who would act in their own self-interest? It's important to consider another intriguing angle, the possibility of a family conspiracy. While Lorenzo's public image was that of a ruler loved by his people, the Medici family was no stranger to internal power struggles. Some historians have suggested that members of the Medici family itself could have played a role in his demise. After all, Lorenzo had been the undisputed leader of the family for many years, and his death left a power vacuum. Could his relatives have seen an opportunity to consolidate power by ridding themselves of him? The more we examine the evidence, the more we begin to question the official narrative of Lorenzo's death. The historical records suggest he died of a fever, but could this fever have been induced by something far more nefarious? In the absence of concrete evidence, it's easy to dismiss the idea of foul play, but history is full of cases where the true story remains hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Lorenzo de' Medici was a man of immense influence and power, but his sudden death is a mystery that has intrigued historians for centuries. Was his death truly the result of illness, or was it the result of a deliberate act by those who saw him as a threat? As we dive deeper into the mystery of Lorenzo's death, we'll begin to uncover the political intrigue, power struggles, and rivalries that may have led to his untimely demise. The answers may never be fully revealed, but the questions will continue to linger, leaving us to ponder the true nature of his death and the forces that shaped the fate of Renaissance Florence. The question of whether Lorenzo de' Medici was murdered or whether his death was the result of natural causes remains unresolved. But one thing is clear: his sudden death marked a turning point in the history of Florence. The Medici family, despite their enduring influence, never fully recovered from his loss. As we continue to unravel the complexities of Renaissance politics and intrigue, we can only wonder, did Lorenzo de' Medici fall victim to his own ambition, or was he the target of those who sought to seize power for themselves? Stay tuned, because the story behind his death is far more complex than anyone could have ever imagined. Thomas More, a figure of both admiration and controversy, was executed by the order of King Henry VIII in 1535. Known for his sharp intellect, moral convictions, and his role as a key advisor to the king, More's death was not just a matter of political consequence. It was a moment that marked the intense and turbulent political climate of the time. But the question remains, was More's death truly a matter of his refusal to accept Henry's break from the Catholic Church, or was there something deeper at play? Could there have been personal motives behind his execution? And if the reasons for Thomas More's death were far more complex than simply his religious beliefs? More was a staunch Catholic and a highly respected philosopher and writer. His work Utopia had earned him both admiration and scorn. But despite his intellectual prowess and political acumen, More found himself on the wrong side of the king's ambition. In 1534, Henry VIII declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England, breaking away from the authority of the Pope. This move was politically motivated, designed to secure his divorce from Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn. However, Thomas More, a devout devout Catholic, could not accept this break with the church, and he refused to recognize Henry's supremacy over religious matters. This refusal ultimately led to his arrest and trial for treason. But what if there were more to it than just his religious conviction? More was a powerful man, respected by many, and his opposition to Henry's reforms posed a significant threat to the king's control. Could his death have been part of a larger political maneuver to silence someone whose influence could have swayed the masses? Was Thomas More's execution not only the result of his beliefs, but also the result of his political clout and the threat he posed to Henry's reign? When you look at the broader political context, the picture becomes more complex. Henry VIII's court was rife with intrigue and betrayal, and no one, not even those closest to him, was safe from his whims. More, as the Chancellor of England, had once been Henry's most trusted advisor, but the king's desire for absolute power grew, and those who stood in his way, including his most loyal friends, were eliminated one by one. Thomas More's execution was not just a religious act, it was a political one as well, a means to rid the court of a potential rival who had the moral and intellectual authority to challenge the king. The public execution of Thomas More, by beheading, was a gruesome affair, but it also served as a stark reminder of Henry's control over the court and his ability to maintain power through fear. But there's a disturbing thought. Could Thomas More's death have been engineered by those within the court, including the queen or the king's more ruthless advisor? Or had many enemies at court, and his unwillingness to align himself with Henry's desires certainly put him at odds with those who were closest to the king? Was his death merely the result of his defiance, or was it a carefully orchestrated political move designed to send a clear message to others who might think to challenge the king's authority? It's also worth noting that Thomas More's death didn't come without controversy. He was executed after a trial in which the evidence against him was thin. Much of the case against him was built on his refusal to swear an oath of allegiance to the king as the supreme head of the Church of England. But even this refusal was not the sole reason for his death. There were personal factors at play as well. More's steadfast refusal to comply with Henry's demands was seen by some as a challenge not just to the king's power, but also to the very foundations of the monarchy itself. And so Henry, feeling cornered and perhaps even betrayed, chose to eliminate More from the equation. Now consider a little-known fact. Thomas More's family was deeply affected by his death. His daughter, Margaret Rober, was one of his most ardent supporters. In fact, she is said to have been so devoted to her father that she secretly rescued his head after his execution, preserving it as a relic. This personal aspect of the story provides a glimpse into the emotional and familial cost of More's execution. It wasn't just a political decision, it was a deeply personal one, not only for More but for those who loved him. Could this have played a role in his death too? Were there forces at work that understood how personal loyalties and emotional ties could be manipulated to further the king's agenda? Furthermore, there's an interesting and somewhat controversial element to More's execution that few consider. More, despite being a deeply religious man, had no qualms about using power to achieve his ends when it suited him. As a ruler, More had ordered executions himself, and he had been complicit in the very systems of oppression that he later condemned. Some critics argue that his moral convictions were not entirely consistent, that he had in fact been a part of the same political system that ultimately turned against him. This contradiction has led some to question whether More's death was an inevitable result of the system he had helped to create, or if it was purely the result of personal defiance. As we dig deeper into the layers of Thomas More's death, we begin to see how multifaceted and complicated the situation truly was. His execution wasn't just about his religious beliefs, it was about politics, power, and the dangerous game of court intrigue. That raises the question, how much of what we know about his death is the truth, and how much of it has been shaped by those who wanted to control the narrative? The mystery behind Thomas More's death reveals not only the politics of Henry VIII's court, but also the dark undercurrents of loyalty, betrayal, and ambition that ran through the veins of the Renaissance. In the end, Thomas More's death serves as a cautionary tale, not just about the dangers of defying authority, but about the consequences of being caught in the midst of political conflict. It was a tragic end for a man who had once been one of England's most powerful and respected figures, but as we've seen, there were far more forces at play in his death than just his refusal to accept Henry's supremacy. It was a story of ambition, betrayal, and the dangerous consequences of standing up for one's beliefs in a world where power often trumps all else. Isabella d'Este, a figure of power, beauty, and sophistication, was a driving force in the Italian Renaissance. Known as the First Lady of the Renaissance, she was a patron of the arts, a political player, and a woman whose influence extended far beyond her position as the wife of Francesco Gonzaga. However, in 1539, Isabella's sudden death raised more than a few eyebrows. While it was officially attributed to a prolonged illness, there are lingering questions. Could her death have been something darker? Was it a tragic case of illness, or could betrayal have been the true cause? Isabella was much more than a royal consort. She wielded significant power in the courts of Mantua, influencing the artistic and political landscapes of her time. As a patron of artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Titian, and Raphael, she was deeply embedded in the Renaissance's cultural awakening. Her court was one of the most vibrant in Italy, attracting the finest minds of the era. But despite her strength and political acumen, her death, which came after a prolonged illness, was sudden and mysterious. Could her position in the political hierarchy have made her a target? Many historians have suggested that Isabella's death was caused by a natural illness, possibly a fever or a prolonged bout of sickness. She had been ill for months before her death, with symptoms that could have been attributed to a number of conditions. Yet the timing of her death, combined with the political intrigue surrounding her court, leads us to question whether illness was truly the cause. Could Isabella have been poisoned? Given her position as a powerful political figure, it's not unreasonable to consider that she may have had enemies within her own court. The notion of political poisoning was common at the time, and the courts of Renaissance Italy were notorious for their ruthless rivalries. Isabella's court was not without its internal struggles. She had many allies, but also a fair share of enemies who may have seen her as an obstacle to their own ambitions. Political rivals, particularly those within the Gonzaga family, had reasons to want her out of the way. Isabella's influence could have threatened their plans, and in a time where ambition often led to bloodshed, poisoning was a tool that could be wielded discreetly. Could someone close to her have taken advantage of her weakened state, slipping poison into her meals or drinks over the course of her illness? The suspicion of poisoning is further complicated by Isabella's health condition. She had been suffering for several months, but reports indicate that her health deteriorated rapidly in the final weeks leading to her death. It wasn't just a sudden collapse, it was a slow decline, which is typical of poisoning. The subtlety of the symptoms, combined with the length of the illness, suggests that poisoning may have been administered over time, making it difficult to trace until it was too late. The court's physicians, while well-trained, would have had a hard time diagnosing the cause of death, particularly in a time when the understanding of toxins and poisons was rudimentary at best. What adds to the intrigue is the fact that Isabella was a woman of great intelligence and cunning. She wasn't easily swayed or manipulated. So, could the cause of her death be attributed to something as simple as natural illness, or was it a calculated move by those who stood to gain from her demise? The timing of her death, at the height of her power and influence, is a crucial factor. Could Isabella have been removed as part of a larger political play? The idea that someone close to her could have orchestrated her death is chilling, but it's not out of the realm of possibility in the cutthroat world of Renaissance politics. However, we must also consider the idea that Isabella's death was, in fact, a tragic result of natural causes. There is a possibility that her health had simply deteriorated over time, perhaps exacerbated by stress, poor diet, or the demands of maintaining her position in the political landscape. Her life had been one of intense responsibility, managing the court, overseeing artistic commissions, and navigating the complex world of Renaissance politics. Could all of this pressure have led to a breakdown in her health? It's important to consider that sometimes illness is just illness, and there may not always be a grand conspiracy behind every death. Still, the fact remains that Isabella's sudden and suspicious death left many questions unanswered. The timing of her illness, combined with the political dynamics of the time, makes us wonder if her death could have been more than just a result of her health. The question of whether Isabella d'Este was the victim of a betrayal or simply a casualty of illness is one that still lingers today. One strange fact that could give us a clue lies in her will. In the final months of her life, Isabella began to make provisions for the future of her court, her family, and her treasures. It was a clear indication that she sensed her time was running out. But did she sense it on her own, or did others know before she did? Some historians argue that her sudden decision to secure her legacy might have been prompted by a sense of impending danger, a danger she could not control. Could she have known something was coming, or was it simply the rational foresight of a woman who had lived a life of great political maneuvering? The court itself was rife with secrets, and Isabella's death left many unanswered questions. While we may never know the true cause of her demise, the lingering suspicions surrounding her illness and the potential for betrayal remain tantalizing. Was Isabella d'Este truly the victim of natural causes, or was she the victim of a larger plot that played out in the shadows of the Renaissance court? Isabella d'Este's death is a reminder of how quickly power can be undone, and how the most influential figures can fall prey to the politics that they themselves helped to create. By illness, or by the hands of those who saw her as a threat, her death continues to be one of the most intriguing and mysterious events of the Renaissance. Her life, too, serves as a testament to the precariousness of power and the dangerous consequences of navigating the treacherous waters of Renaissance politics. What secrets did Isabella take with her to the grave? Perhaps we'll never know, but the mystery surrounding her death ensures that her legacy and the questions about it live on. Cosimo de' Medici, the patriarch of the influential Medici family, was one of the most powerful figures of the Italian Renaissance. He was a patron of the arts, a shrewd banker, and a key player in the politics of Florence. Cosimo's death in 1464, however, remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the period. Official accounts claim that he died from a stroke, a common cause of death at the time, but as with many powerful figures, the circumstances surrounding his death are far from clear. Was it really a natural death, or was something more sinister at play? Cosimo's life was filled with political maneuvering, financial dealings, and countless alliances, some of which were far from amicable. His influence in Florence was immense, but it also earned him many enemies. The Medici family was at the heart of Florentine politics, and Cosimo had made plenty of enemies in the banking world and among political rivals. It's no secret secret that in Renaissance Italy, where alliances shifted with the wind, the road to power was often paved with betrayal, poison, and assassination. So, could Cosimo's death have been the result of a political conspiracy, or was it simply the result of his failing health? While it's certainly plausible that Cosimo could have suffered a stroke, as reported, the details surrounding his illness are remarkably vague. It's said that Cosimo fell ill after returning from a trip to Venice, a journey that he took as part of his regular business dealings. Historians have noted that he was not in great health for some time, suffering from various ailments, but his sudden, rapid decline left many questioning whether there might have been more to his death. Some have even suggested that Cosimo could have been poisoned, a theory that hinges on the intrigue and political rivalry that surrounded him. The idea of poisoning is particularly intriguing when we consider Cosimo's enemies. As the head of the Medici, Cosimo had powerful rivals, particularly within the banking world. Some have speculated that his wealth and influence in Florence may have made him a target for those who sought to eliminate him from the political scene. In a time when politics were often resolved through covert methods, poisoning was not just a possibility, it was a weapon of choice for those who sought to maintain power by any means necessary. Could Cosimo's political rivals have used his illness as an opportunity to rid themselves of him once and for all? After all, poisoning would explain the rapid onset and decline of his symptoms. Or Cosimo's death is the mysterious way in which it was handled by those around him. It was reported that Cosimo's death was followed by a sudden shift in the balance of power in Florence. His son, Piero de' Medici, took over as head of the family, but Piero was not the politician his father had been. Piero lacked Cosimo's finesse and political acumen, and Florence quickly began to experience political turmoil. Was the sudden change in leadership due to Cosimo's natural death, or was there something more to the story? Perhaps there were political machinations at play even in the wake of his death. Could the family members surrounding him have played a part in his untimely demise? Furthermore, Cosimo's death left many questions regarding his relationship with his own family members. His son Piero was his natural heir, but many historians point out that Piero's reign was marked by instability. Some suggest that the rapid demise of Cosimo and the subsequent rise of Piero was no coincidence. Could Cosimo's family members have been complicit in his death, either out of ambition or due to the pressures of the political environment they lived in? This idea raises further questions. Was Cosimo's death a mere medical issue, or was there a deeper conspiracy at work within his own family? Some believe that the answer lies in the broader political climate of the time. Cosimo's influence stretched well beyond Florence. His wealth and power allowed him to navigate the complex web of Renaissance Italy's politics, but his enemies weren't just confined to the city-state. Rival families and powerful factions who felt threatened by Cosimo's rise to power would have seen his death as a convenient opportunity to remove a powerful figure from the political landscape. The Medici family had made many enemies over the years, and Cosimo's death could have been the perfect time for rivals to strike without fear of retaliation. The idea that Cosimo's death could have been a result of political plotting within his own family or by external forces remains a tantalizing theory. Poisoning, while often a method of choice for those in power, was by no means a guaranteed method of control, and it is possible that Cosimo's stroke was simply the result of his declining health. However, the mysterious circumstances surrounding his death, combined with the political instability that followed, continued to make it one of the most fascinating unresolved mysteries of the Renaissance. Was Cosimo de' Medici truly the victim of natural causes, or did his death mark the beginning of a darker chapter for the Medici family? The truth may never be fully known, but it remains one of the most intriguing puzzles of Italian Renaissance history. The mystery surrounding Cosimo de' Medici's death has persisted for centuries, and while it's easy to chalk it up to natural causes, the timing and circumstances still raise questions. The political landscape in Renaissance Italy was a volatile one, and Cosimo's death was a turning point that led to the downfall of the Medici family's grip on power. Whether it was nature or conspiracy, the legacy of Cosimo de' Medici is one of ambition, intrigue, and unanswered questions. The mystery of his death is, in many ways, a reflection of the complexities of Renaissance politics, where the line between natural and unnatural causes was often blurred, and where the thirst for power could lead to fatal consequences. Francesco Sforza, Duke of Milan, was a powerful figure in Renaissance Italy. A former mercenary captain who had risen through the ranks, he seized control of Milan in 1450 and founded the Sforza dynasty. He was a man of military prowess, known for his strategic mind and his ability to keep Milan independent amidst the often tumultuous politics of the time. But in 1466, his sudden death left many questions unanswered. Could his passing have been part of a greater conspiracy, or was it simply the result of poor health? Sforza's death followed a brief illness, which many attributed to natural causes, but the timing and suddenness of it raised suspicions. He was only 46 at the time of his death, and while there had been reports of him feeling unwell for several days, nothing indicated the severity of his condition. Some historians suggest that his death was simply a consequence of a lingering illness, but the rapid decline in his health is hard to ignore. Could Francesco Sforza have been poisoned? The idea of poisoning is not far-fetched given the political climate of the time. There were multiple factions vying for control of Milan, and Sforza's position made him a target for his enemies. In Renaissance Italy, political alliances were often fragile, and betrayal was a common tool used to gain power. Many of Sforza's enemies were known to have been dissatisfied with his rule, and his influence over Milan made him a prime candidate for those looking to alter the political landscape. The idea that he could have been poisoned by a rival is not beyond the realm of possibility. In fact, it would have been a relatively easy way for someone to eliminate him without drawing attention to themselves. But poisoning wasn't the only theory surrounding his death. Some suggest that his family members may have played a role in his demise. The Sforza family was not without its own internal conflicts, and Francesco's heirs were already jockeying for position. His son, Galeazzo Maria Sforza, was set to take over the duke's title, but it was known that Galeazzo had a strained relationship with his father. The power struggle within the family might have led to Francesco's death, whether through direct action or by allowing his illness to be exacerbated. An interesting fact to consider is the political climate of Milan. Milan was a city-state constantly surrounded by threats, and its rulers needed to be not just politically astute but also militarily capable. Francesco had been a military commander, but his sudden illness and death left Milan vulnerable to external threats. The timing of his death could have been too convenient for those who sought to take advantage of Milan's weakened state. Could a foreign power have been behind the plot to remove him? The possibility of outside involvement cannot be dismissed, especially given the complexity of Italian politics at the time. Adding to the mystery is the question of the rapid decline in his health. While it is common for people to experience a quick deterioration when they are elderly or suffering from a chronic illness, Francesco's case was different. He had been a relatively healthy man, so it seemed unusual that his health would worsen so quickly. Could his condition have been artificially accelerated by an external agent, or was it just an unfortunate progression of his illness? The details of his sickness remain unclear, and without autopsy reports or detailed contemporary accounts, the truth may never be known. Another theory that has been proposed is that Francesco Sforza was the victim of an internal conspiracy. The Sforza family, despite its wealth and power, was not immune to infighting. Francesco had been a mercenary before rising to power, and it is possible that those who helped him ascend to the throne were displeased with his leadership. Some historians suggest that members of his inner circle might have seen his death as a way to either protect their own power or pave the way for the next ruler. In such a context, assassination was not only a possible motive but a logical one. The rapid power transition after Francesco's death further complicates the situation. His son Galeazzo became the new Duke of Milan, but his rule was marked by instability. Galeazzo's reign saw tensions with the French and a series of internal conflicts that would eventually weaken the Sforza family. His inability to consolidate power could be seen as a consequence of the political instability created by Francesco's untimely death. Could this instability have been deliberately orchestrated to destabilize Milan for someone else's gain? In conclusion, Francesco Sforza's death is shrouded in mystery. Was it natural, or was it the result of foul play? The theory that he was poisoned by his enemies, both external and internal, is compelling. Whether by rivals in Milan, a disgruntled family member, or even a foreign power seeking to undermine the Sforza dynasty, Francesco's sudden demise opened the door for a power vacuum that was exploited by many. The exact cause of his death may never be fully understood, but the political implications of his passing are clear. It was a turning point for Milan, one that set the stage for years of instability and intrigue in the region. Ultimately, Francesco Sforza's death was not just a personal loss, but a significant moment in the volatile history of Renaissance Italy. King Henry II's 1859 seemed like a tragic accident. He was mortally wounded during a jousting tournament when a lance struck his eye. It appeared to be just a freak accident, one of those incidents that happens in a sport so full of risk. But what if it wasn't? What if there was something more behind it? Something deliberate, something more sinister? On the surface, the cause of Henry VII seemed clear-cut. The lance hit his eye, and he succumbed to his injuries. Some say it wasn't just an accident. Could the tournament have been arranged for the purpose of removing him from the throne? After all, Henry II's reign had been plagued by political tensions, both at court and beyond. Could someone at court have orchestrated this accident to remove him from power? It's easy to imagine the political intrigue, the power struggles. This was a time when those seeking the throne were often willing to go to extreme lengths to secure their position. Let's take a step back and look at Henry II's situation leading up to that fateful day. He had been king for more than 20 years, and while his rule was marked by some military victories, it was also riddled with internal strife. Henry had two powerful factions vying for control, one represented by his wife, Catherine de' Medici, and the other by his sons, each of whom had their own ambitions. Tensions were high at court, and Henry's position was becoming increasingly precarious. His reign had been anything but peaceful, with external wars and internal struggles, especially concerning the influence of his wife Catherine and her close relationship with her sons. But could this tournament, a seemingly innocent event, have been a cover for a political assassination? The tournament itself was held in celebration of the marriage between Henry's daughter, Elizabeth of France, and Philip II of Spain, a political alliance that had stirred much controversy. Many in France, including powerful nobles and rival factions, were not happy with this union. They saw it as an unnecessary and weakening alliance with Spain, which had its own agenda. Could someone have seen Henry's jousting match as the perfect opportunity to bring about his death? There thereby changing the course of French politics. One of the strangest aspects of the situation is the fact that the wound that led to Henry's death was inflicted by a lance that splintered, lodging a piece of the wooden shaft in his eye. It was a critical injury, but not one that should have been instantly fatal. Some medical experts argue that the real cause of death was the infection that set in, and the complications it caused. It's worth noting that the event was so high profile that it left little room for error. One would assume that the event would have been closely watched, with the best care available at the time. So why did Henry's injury spiral into something so deadly? Political tensions have long been suspected as a factor in Henry's death. One theory suggests that the rivalry between the queen and her sons might have been the catalyst. In the context of court politics, anything was possible. The influence of Catherine de' Medici, Henry's wife, played a significant role. Could she have had a hand in orchestrating his death? She was known for her intelligence and political shrewdness, and some believe that she may have seen her husband's death as an opportunity to maneuver herself and her sons into more powerful positions. The dynamics between the monarchs and the court were incredibly complex, and Henry's sons were not without ambition. It's even possible that Henry's death was a tragic accident, exacerbated by the frailty of his body. His health had already been in decline before the joust. Was it merely a matter of timing that his body was unable to withstand the shock of the injury, or was his body already weakened by other factors? Could someone have taken advantage of that vulnerability? And what about the circumstances leading up to the jousting match itself? Henry was reportedly eager to participate, despite his advanced age for a man still competing in such dangerous tournaments. Some say he was warned against participating due to his deteriorating health, but he ignored the advice. The king's pride, his desire to remain the strong and active ruler, might have clouded his judgment. In some ways, this contributed to his downfall. Did his pride lead to his death? Was it a simple accident of fate, or could it have been a calculated move by one of the many rivals surrounding him? What we do know for certain is that Henry II's death left a deep impact on the French court. His wife Catherine took control of the regency, managing the kingdom for their sons, who were still too young to rule. While Catherine's ability to navigate the complexities of court politics is often admired, it's hard not to wonder about the role that Henry's death played in her rise to power. Did Henry's death lead directly to Catherine's more prominent political influence, or was she always destined to take the reins of power? The repercussions of Henry's death were felt for years to come. His sons, Francis II and Charles IX, struggled with instability and were often seen as pawns in the hands of their mother. Catherine de' Medici was an astute strategist, but her rise to power wasn't without its cost. Whether Henry's death was orchestrated or simply the result of unfortunate timing, it opened the door for her to assume the role of the most powerful figure in France during her son's reigns. But the question remains, was Henry II's death just a tragic accident, or was it part of a larger scheme to alter the course of French history? The mystery endures, and the political implications are still a topic of speculation today. Pope Julius II, the warrior pope known for commissioning Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel and his political maneuvering, passed away in 1513. On the surface, his death was attributed to natural causes, specifically malaria, which was rampant during his time. However, the circumstances surrounding his death have led to numerous questions. Was it truly just the disease that claimed him, or could there have been darker forces at work? Julius II's papacy was one marked by aggressive politics, military campaigns, and numerous enemies, both within the Vatican and outside. He was not only the spiritual leader of the Catholic Church, but also a powerful political figure, maneuvering in the highly charged and dangerous political environment of Renaissance Italy. Many, especially his rivals, had much to gain from his death. Let's take a step back and look at Julius's history. He was a man known for his volatile temper and ambitious nature. His papacy was filled with conflict, from the aggressive military campaigns to consolidate papal territories, to his involvement in the intricate political webs within Italy. He made many enemies, particularly with the powerful city-states and their rulers, not to mention other factions within the church itself. Julius had many political and personal opponents, including those in his own court who were often displeased by his methods and choices. His death would have been a significant opportunity for those seeking power, and some historians argue that it is no coincidence that it happened when it did. But could Julius have been poisoned? While malaria was certainly a common cause of death at the time, some suggest that it was too convenient for those who had a vested interest in seeing him gone. The story goes that Julius' health had been in decline for several years before his death, and while he was known to suffer from various ailments, his doctors claimed malaria was the cause. However, some believe this diagnosis was too simplistic. Could his sickness have been fabricated? Could someone, perhaps a rival faction within the church, have poisoned him slowly, knowing that it would take time for the effects to show? Some conspiracy theorists argue that Pope Julius II was poisoned as part of a larger plot. His papacy was filled with scandal, and there were many who would benefit from his sudden demise. One of the most popular theories is that his rivals within the church, perhaps those aligned with the Borgia family or other powerful clerics, saw his death as a way to seize control of the papacy. His aggressive militarism had alienated many powerful figures, making him a target for those who disagreed with his methods. These figures, knowing Julius's frailty, might have taken advantage of his declining health to orchestrate a slower, more covert form of assassination. The timing of his death raises even more questions. Julius had been in power for nearly a decade, decade, overseeing some of the most transformative projects in the Renaissance, including the Sistine Chapel and the St. Peter's Basilica reconstruction. But by 1513, his energy was dwindling. The year of his death was also a time of great political upheaval within Italy, and some historians speculate that his political enemies had timed their moves perfectly. After all, the papacy was an incredibly powerful position, and those in line to succeed Julius would have known that removing him would mean significant power shifts. His death was incredibly convenient for those seeking to alter the balance of power within the Church and Italian politics. Additionally, the possibility of internal poisoning the Vatican has not been ruled out. Julius, having so many enemies, could have had a trusted servant or member of his own court acting on behalf of those with much to gain. During this time, poison was often used as a tool for political elimination, and several historical accounts mention that the Vatican had its own internal struggles regarding succession. Some believe that the cardinal who succeeded Julius, Giovanni de Medici, later Pope Leo X, was not only Julius's political adversary, but also someone who could have stood to benefit from his death. Julius' death was a key turning point for the papacy, ushering in a period of intense political maneuvering and shifting alliances within the Church. The power struggle that followed his death saw many factions vying for control. Giovanni de Medici, Julius's successor, was elected Pope Leo X shortly after his death. Was this a natural succession, or was there more manipulation behind the scene? Could Leo's rise to power have been part of a carefully planned move by those who sought to dismantle Julius's aggressive policies and replace him with someone more malleable? Historians continue to argue over the true cause of Pope Julius II's death. The mystery surrounding it remains a captivating story of intrigue and power struggles within the Renaissance. We may never know for sure whether Julius's death was the result of natural illness or if darker forces were at play, but what we can be certain of is that Julius' passing marked a dramatic shift in the politics of the Catholic Church and left behind a legacy filled with both artistic triumph and political scandal. One of the most influential figures in art and science, died in 1519 at the age of 67. His death, officially attributed to a stroke, has long been regarded as a natural end for such a legendary mind. However, there is more to his passing than the simple explanation of aging and illness. Could there have been something darker behind the death of the Renaissance's ultimate polymath? Many believe that Leonardo's vast knowledge, particularly in engineering and anatomy, may have made him a target. He was not only an artist, but an inventor, a scientist, and a thinker whose ideas and discoveries could have changed the course of history. So, could someone have had a reason to silence him? What if his death was not just a natural event, but a strategically orchestrated plan to prevent his ideas from being shared? Leonardo's final years were marked by a decline in health, and he spent them in the court of King Francis I of France. While living in the French court, Leonardo was revered, but he also found himself in the midst of a complex political landscape. The King of France, Francis I, was known to still. Was the admiration genuine, or could it have been part of a political maneuver? Some believe that the French court, with its powerful influence, might have seen Leonardo's potential to disrupt the delicate balance of power. The manner in which Leonardo's death occurred has fueled suspicion. It was noted that he died shortly after a visit from King Francis, who was reportedly at his bedside. Was it a stroke that took him, or did something more sinister happen in the royal court? While most records state that he died peacefully in his bed, there is a lingering question. Could the French king have been involved in a plot to end Leonardo's life before he could reveal too much? Could Leonardo have been poisoned, his death timed perfectly for the king's benefit? The notion of poisoning was a common tool used in political warfare during this period, and it's entirely possible that Leonardo could have been a victim of it. He was not just a painter, but a man whose insights into human anatomy, warfare, and engineering could have threatened the power structure of those around him. Did the French court see his work as a threat, and did this contribute to his untimely death? Furthermore, Leonardo's death came just as he was finishing his most ambitious and complex works, including his studies on the human body. He had already made significant strides in dissecting cadavers to understand anatomy in a way that was revolutionary for the time. These findings could have had a profound effect on the medical and scientific world, and some suggest that those in positions of power might have sought to stop him before he could reveal too much. One of the most fascinating aspects of Leonardo's death is the question of whether he knew something that he never shared. It is well known that he kept his scientific ideas largely to himself, writing in codes and keeping many of his works hidden. Could he have had information that certain powerful people didn't want to be exposed? Was his death a convenient way to ensure that these secrets were never revealed? While many argue that the stroke was a natural cause of death, others point to the mysterious gaps in Leonardo's medical history. He had a reputation for being a poor caretaker of his own health, often neglecting his physical needs in pursuit of intellectual endeavors. However, some historical accounts suggest that he may have suffered from a series of small strokes leading up to his death, which could indicate that his health was deteriorating long before the final fatal event. This brings us to the question of whether his decline in health was truly just the result of aging, or if there were external factors that hastened it. Some believe that his decision to live the final years of his life at the French court, away from Italy, was partly due to his worsening health and the fact that he might have been under surveillance by those who saw him as a potential threat. The political intrigue of the time was rife with betrayal and backstabbing, and Leonardo's own enigmatic personality may have added to the mystery surrounding his death. The possibility of foul play in Leonardo's death introduces an interesting layer to his legacy. Could his passing have been orchestrated for a specific purpose? If so, who would have been behind it, and what were they trying to protect or suppress? These are the questions that have intrigued historians and scholars for centuries. In conclusion, while the stroke theory remains the most widely accepted explanation for Leonardo da Vinci's death, the idea of foul play cannot be entirely ruled out. Timing of his death, combined with his unique position in the French court, raises suspicions about whether it was simply a natural death or part of a larger, more politically motivated plot. Was Leonardo da Vinci's death truly just the end of a brilliant life, or was it something much darker, orchestrated by those who feared his potential to change the world? The mystery remains, and perhaps in time, we will uncover the truth. Hello, Machiavelli, the author of O the Prince, was one of the most influential political theorists of the Renaissance. His work reshaped the understanding of power and statecraft, but his own death is shrouded in mystery. Did he die from a natural illness, or could his demise have been the result of political maneuvering? Was Machiavelli poisoned by his enemies, or was his death simply the culmination of his declining health? Machiavelli's political career was filled with intrigue. He was a trusted advisor to the Republic of Florence, but after the Medici family returned to power, he found himself out of favor and exiled. In his later years, he was ostracized and disillusioned. Despite his intellectual legacy, some believe that his political enemies, fearing his influence, may have taken action against him. Could the author of O the Prince have been seen as a threat by those in power? The cause of his death is often attributed to a fever, which he suffered from for several days before passing away in 1527. But there are discrepancies in the accounts. Was it truly just a fever, or was it something more insidious? Some believe that Machiavelli's illness was not natural at all. After all, his reputation for cunning and manipulation could have made him enemies among those who felt threatened by his political ideas. Could his death have been the result of a deliberate act to silence him and his controversial views? Poisoning, though a common method of political assassination during the Renaissance, could have been the means by which Machiavelli was eliminated. His political writings, particularly O the Prince, promoted the idea that rulers should do whatever necessary to maintain power, even if it meant resorting to ruthless tactics. Could those who feared Machiavelli's influence have adopted these very principles against him? It would not be unthinkable for a ruler or rival to eliminate him, fearing that his strategies could turn against them. Some speculate that Machiavelli may have known too much about the inner workings of the Florentine state, and as he grew older and more isolated, those in power may have seen him as a potential loose end. The idea of poisoning, especially in a time of political instability, is not far-fetched. Several prominent figures during the Renaissance were known to have been poisoned by political enemies, and Machiavelli's own writings suggest that such acts could have been justified as part of a larger political strategy. Despite these suspicions, there is no conclusive evidence to suggest that Machiavelli was poisoned. His health had been in decline for some time, and his death might have simply been the result of old age and illness. However, it's also worth considering that the details surrounding his final days are scarce. Was the illness he succumbed to truly just the natural course of his declining health, or was it a carefully constructed ruse to mask a more nefarious plot? The timing of his death also raises questions. Machiavelli passed away in the same year that the Medici family reclaimed control of Florence. The political atmosphere in the city was volatile, and it's possible that Machiavelli's ideas were seen as dangerous to the Medici's newfound authority. Could his death have been part of a larger plan to secure the Medici regime, ensuring that any remaining threats to their power were eliminated? There is a certain irony in the circumstances surrounding Machiavelli's death. The man who wrote about the ruthless measures necessary to secure power, who argued that the ends justify the means, may have found himself the victim of the very strategies he described. Was his death the result of political scheming, a culmination of his own advice, or simply the inevitable end of a man who had spent his life in the pursuit of power? In the end, Machiavelli's death remains one of history's great mysteries. Was it just the consequence of poor health, or was it the result of a deliberate political act by those who feared his intellectual legacy? Could his death have been a political maneuver, one last play in the deadly game of Renaissance politics? While we may never know the full truth, the mystery of Machiavelli's demise continues to captivate historians and scholars to this day. Machiavelli's life and death serve as a stark reminder of the dangerous world in which he lived, a world where power, intrigue, and betrayal were commonplace. His death, like his life, raises more questions than answers, and it serves as a perfect encapsulation of the political turmoil that defined the Renaissance. Whether he died from illness, was poisoned, or fell victim to a political conspiracy, one thing is certain: Machiavelli's death was as complex and mysterious as the political landscape he spent his life navigating. Isabella of Castile, the queen who helped unify Spain and sponsored Christopher Columbus' journey to the New World, died in 1504 under circumstances that many consider to be natural. But what if there's more to the story? Could her death have been part of a larger political plot hidden behind the royal facade? Was Isabella's death orchestrated to benefit those around her? Let's explore the intriguing possibility that there was more than just natural causes behind her demise. Isabella was a formidable ruler, and her death at the age of 53 3 marked the end of an era. Throughout her reign, Isabella navigated Spain through a series of political, religious, and military challenges. Her marriage to Ferdinand of Aragon had secured the union of two of Spain's most powerful kingdoms, and together they solidified Spain's role as a rising European power. She was a mother of powerful children, including her daughter Catherine of Aragon, who would later become the first wife of Henry VIII of England, and her son, who would become Emperor Charles V. But with all this power, it's hard to believe her death was just the result of natural causes. Isabella's death came after a prolonged period of mental and physical decline, which some attributed to the stress of her reign. However, the timing of her death raises questions. She passed away just months after a series of personal and political upheavals, including the conquest of Granada and the expulsion of Jews from Spain, two of her most controversial decisions. While these events had solidified her legacy, they also made her many enemies, both within Spain and abroad. Could factions within her own court have conspired to hasten her death? Many historians point to the possibility of poisoning. At the time, political rivals often resorted to this deadly tactic to remove those they saw as obstacles. In Isabella's case, her health had been fragile in the months leading up to her death, and some suspected that her illness was not merely the result of old age. Poisoning, especially by subtle means, was a common method of political assassination in the Renaissance, and Isabella was no stranger to political intrigue. Could her enemies have seen her as a threat to their own power? Did they decide that her death would be the best way to secure their positions? There is another factor that complicates the mystery: Isabella's relationship with her husband, Ferdinand of Aragon. Though they ruled jointly, Ferdinand was often away on military campaigns, leaving Isabella to govern alone. Some have speculated that Ferdinand's absence could have played a role in her deteriorating health, as she was left to manage the empire under immense pressure. But others argue that Ferdinand, who was known for his own ambitions, may have seen an opportunity in his wife's death, a chance to consolidate power for himself. The political landscape in Spain was precarious, and Ferdinand's ambitions did not always align with Isabella's vision for Spain's future. Another layer to this mystery is the fact that Isabella's death had significant implications for the future of Spain. After her passing, her daughter Juana was left to take the throne, but her mental instability meant that Ferdinand effectively took control. This created a power vacuum in which Ferdinand could maneuver to maintain control over Spain, despite the formal power shifting to his daughter. Could Isabella's death have been part of a larger strategy to ensure Ferdinand's continued influence over the Spanish crown? The question remains: was Isabella's death simply the result of natural causes, or was it the outcome of a conspiracy? Some believe that her health problems were indeed due to a combination of stress and age, while others suspect that the political intrigues of her court played a role. Regardless of the true cause, Isabella's death marks the end of an era and the beginning of a new, more politically complex chapter in Spanish history. What is certain is that Isabella's legacy has been shaped by the actions of those who followed her. Whether or not she was the victim of a conspiracy, her death set off a chain of events that would ultimately affect the future of Spain and Europe. The true story of her death may never be fully known, but the mystery surrounding it remains one of history's great unsolved puzzles. Isabella's story is a reminder of how the intersection of politics, power, and personal ambition can shape the course of history in ways that we may never fully understand. The details of her death may remain elusive, but the questions they raise continue to intrigue historians, scholars, and those fascinated by the complex world of Renaissance politics. Did political rivalry and ambition play a role in the Queen's death, or was her passing the inevitable result of a life lived under the immense pressure of leadership? Only time will tell, but the story of Isabella of Castile is far from over. Lucrezia Borgia was a woman whose life was as scandalous as her death. Known for her political marriages, rumored affairs, and her infamous family, the Borgia name was both feared and revered during the Renaissance. But Lucrezia's sudden death in 1519 at the age of 39 raises a key question. Did she die naturally, or was her death part of a larger political game? Some say it was due to complications from childbirth, while others suggest it may have been poisoning. Let's unravel the mystery surrounding her death and the possible motives behind it. Lucrezia was born into the Borgia family, one of the most powerful and controversial families in Renaissance Italy. Her father, Pope Alexander VI, was notorious for his corruption, and her brother Cesare Borgia was a ruthless military leader. As a member of the Borgia family, Lucrezia was often caught in a web of intrigue and manipulation, and her marriages, often arranged for political advantage, added to her complex reputation. Yet despite her reputation, Lucrezia was known to have a sharp mind and a deep understanding of court politics, making her a significant figure in her own right. Her death in 1519, just a few months after giving birth to her child, was met with shock. The official cause was complications from childbirth, but there was something odd about the timing of her death. After all, Lucrezia had survived several previous pregnancies. Was it truly a simple childbirth complication, or was there something more sinister at play? To understand the possibilities, we must consider the political landscape of the time and Lucrezia's role in it. First, let's address the most common explanation, that Lucrezia died from the after effects of childbirth. It was not uncommon for women in the Renaissance to die during or shortly after childbirth, given the lack of modern medical knowledge. However, Lucrezia's health was reportedly strong after giving birth to her son, so why the sudden sudden death just weeks later? Could it have been the result of lingering complications, or was the situation much more complicated than we're led to believe? Now let's introduce the possibility of poisoning, a theory that has dogged the Borgia family for centuries. Poisoning was not an uncommon tactic among the powerful in Renaissance Italy, especially in the cutthroat political environment of the time. The Borgia family, particularly Lucrezia's father and brother, had numerous political enemies, and many of them would have viewed Lucrezia as an obstacle to their ambition. Some historians and contemporaries suggest that Lucrezia's death was the result of poisoning, orchestrated either by a rival faction or even by members of her own family. To further complicate matters, we must consider the influence of Lucrezia's final husband, Alfonso d'Este. He was not only a powerful noble but also a potential rival to the Borgia family's influence. Could his position have made Lucrezia a target? Some suggest that Alfonso, or even other members of the d'Este family, might have played a role in her untimely death, seeing her as a political threat or a potential liability. The most shocking aspect of the theory that Lucrezia was poisoned lies in the historical context. Poisoning was often used not only to eliminate rivals but also to settle debts, both political and personal. If Lucrezia had indeed been poisoned, it would have been an attempt to stop her from further exerting influence, especially given her growing role in political negotiations and the court. Her connections to the powerful families of Italy, including the d'Este family, were not just marital but also deeply political. But was Lucrezia truly a pawn in a larger game? Some argue that, despite her circumstances, she was never just a victim. The fact that she was able to maneuver through the complex political landscape of the Renaissance with such skill shows that she was an active participant in the events that shaped her life. Could her death have been part of a larger, more complex set of negotiations and political moves? Was Lucrezia more in control than we give her credit for? In the end, the exact cause of Lucrezia Borgia's death may never be fully understood. Theories abound, from natural causes to political assassination, and each story tells us something different about the complexities of Renaissance politics, the Borgia family's influence, and the role of women in the power struggles of the time. Whether Lucrezia died from complications, poisoning, or something even darker, her legacy continues to captivate historians, scholars, and the general public alike. So what can we conclude from the life and death of Lucrezia Borgia? One thing is clear: she was a woman whose existence defied easy categorization. Was she a pawn, a player, or both? While the mystery of her death will likely never be solved, her story serves as a fascinating glimpse into the intrigues of one of the most turbulent and fascinating periods in history. Lucrezia's life and the tragic mystery of her death will continue to haunt us, revealing the depths of Renaissance power struggles and the complexities of the human condition. Cesare Borgia was a name that struck fear into many across Renaissance Italy. His life was as dramatic and bloody as any political thriller, but his death in 1507 is still shrouded in mystery. Officially, Cesare was killed in battle, but some believe there may have been darker forces at play. His political machinations and violent tactics certainly earned him numerous enemies, both inside and outside his family. But was his death truly the result of his dangerous life, or was it part of a deadly conspiracy? Cesare Borgia was the son of Pope Alexander VI, a man infamous for his own corruption and ruthlessness. Raised in the cutthroat world of Italian politics, Cesare was not only a skilled military leader, but also a cunning strategist. His rise to power was rapid, and his ambitions even higher. But Cesare's life was filled with bloodshed, betrayal, and ruthless tactics, which made him both feared and despised. His father's papacy gave him political leverage, and Cesare used that power to create a feared and formidable military force. However, Cesare's downfall came swiftly. In 1507, he was killed during a military campaign in Navarre, Spain, under mysterious circumstances. The official account tells us that he died in battle, but many believe that the real story is far darker. Some historians suggest that Cesare was betrayed by his own men, who had grown weary of his leadership and political ambitions. Others argue that his death was the result of a calculated conspiracy orchestrated by his political enemies. After all, Cesare's life was filled with enemies, both in the Vatican and within his own family. To understand the mystery surrounding Cesare's death, we must consider his relationship with his father, Pope Alexander VI. The Borgia family was embroiled in numerous political struggles, and Cesare, as the son of the Pope, was a key player in these conflicts. His rise to power within the Papal States wasn't just a family affair. It was about gaining control of vast territories in Italy and beyond. As Cesare consolidated power, he became a threat not only to external enemies but also to members of his own family, who saw his ambition as a challenge to their own positions. Could Cesare have made enemies even within his own ranks, who eventually decided that he had become a liability? The idea of Cesare being betrayed by his own men is a compelling one, particularly given his political strategy. Cesare was a military leader who relied heavily on alliances, both within the nobility and the military, to carry out his plans. His sudden death may have been a result of those alliances falling apart. Could some of his trusted officers have grown disillusioned with him and seen an opportunity to eliminate him? The theory of betrayal is supported by the fact that Cesare's death came after he had been forced to leave his powerful position in the papal army due to political shifts. With his power waning, he was no longer the unstoppable force he once was. influence. Another possibility is that Cesare's death was a political maneuver by those who sought to eliminate him as a rival. Cesare's political ambitions were vast. He wanted to create a powerful kingdom for himself, one that would rival the Pope's influence in Italy. His plans were met with resistance from both political rivals and his own family. In fact, after the death of his father, Cesare's position weakened, and his political rivals saw his fall as an opportunity to consolidate power. Could Cesare's death have been orchestrated by the enemies he made over the years, those who stood to gain from his demise? One of the most compelling pieces of evidence pointing to a conspiracy is the nature of the political environment at the time. Italy was divided into numerous city-states, and these states were constantly at war with one another. Political alliances were unstable, and betrayal was common. Cesare had many enemies who would have loved to see him dead, and some of these enemies had the means to make that happen. It's possible that Cesare's death was not an accident, but the result of a carefully planned execution by those who stood to gain from his fall. So, was Cesare Borgia the victim of a conspiracy, or was his death simply the result of a life lived on the edge? It's hard to say for certain. What we do know is that Cesare's death marked the end of an era for the Borgia family. His political ambitions died with him, and the Borgia name would never be as powerful as it once was. Whether or not his death was orchestrated by his enemies, Cesare Borgia remains a fascinating figure in Renaissance history, a man whose rise to power was as dramatic as his fall from grace. His death, much like his life, was full of intrigue, mystery, and unanswered questions. But one thing is clear: Cesare Borgia's life and death are the stuff of legend. His ambition, his ruthlessness, and the conspiracy that may have led to his demise continue to captivate historians and history buffs alike. His death is a reminder of the dangers of power and ambition, and the lengths to which people will go to eliminate a rival. Whether he was betrayed, assassinated, or simply met his end in battle, Cesare Borgia's death remains a defining moment in Renaissance history. Elizabeth of York, the mother of Henry VIII, played a crucial role in uniting the warring factions of the War of the Roses, bringing the tumultuous period to an end. However, her sudden death in 1503, shortly after giving birth to her last child, has sparked intense debate over the years. Could her death have been orchestrated by political enemies within the Tudor court? What if her passing wasn't just a tragic consequence of childbirth, but part of a larger, more sinister scheme? Elizabeth was the daughter of King Edward IV and the wife of Henry VII, the first Tudor monarch. Her marriage to Henry VII was a pivotal moment in English history, uniting the warring houses of Lancaster and York. As the mother of the future King Henry VIII, Elizabeth was a powerful and influential figure. Her sudden death at the age of 37, so soon after the birth of her final child, raised suspicions that there might have been more to her passing than what the official reports stated. At first glance, Elizabeth's death seemed like a natural consequence of childbirth. Many women in the Renaissance period died after giving birth due to complications like infection or hemorrhaging. However, Elizabeth's death was unusually sudden and took place in a period where political tensions were high within the Tudor court. Could it be that her death was not just an unfortunate accident, but a strategic move orchestrated by those around her? One theory that has emerged over the years is that Elizabeth's death was part of a larger plot to remove powerful figures from the Tudor court. Elizabeth had significant influence, and her death could have cleared the way for Henry VII to strengthen his grip on power and make way for the future reign of his son, Henry VIII. There were political rivalries brewing within the court at the time, with factions fighting for control of the monarchy and influence over the young king. Could factions within the court have orchestrated Elizabeth's death to achieve their own ambitions? It's important to note that Elizabeth's death came at a time when Henry VII was facing numerous challenges, both from within his court and from external threats. The death of Elizabeth removed a potential obstacle to his authority, and it also cleared the path for his son Henry to eventually ascend to the throne. Some historians believe that her death may have been a well-timed political maneuver to ensure that no one could challenge Henry V's control over the crown. At the time, the Tudor court was a highly dangerous environment, full of intrigue and betrayal. The ambitious lords and ladies of the court were constantly vying for influence and power. Elizabeth, as the queen consort and mother of the heir, was in a position to play a significant role in shaping the future of the Tudor dynasty. Death, part of a larger conspiracy to remove her influence and pave the way for Henry VIII's eventual reign. There's also the possibility that Elizabeth's death may have been caused by poisoning, a method of assassination that was not uncommon among royalty during this period. Poisoning was a common tool of political maneuvering, and those who stood to gain from her death may have seen it as a way to eliminate her without attracting too much attention. The fact that her death was sudden and came with little explanation only adds to the mystery. Could someone have used poison to remove her from the picture and consolidate power? Another point to consider is the rapid recovery of Henry VII after Elizabeth's death. While it is often expected that a grieving husband would mourn the loss of his wife, Henry VII quickly moved forward, securing his political position and preparing for the reign of his son. This could suggest that Elizabeth's death was not seen as a tragic loss, but as a convenient event for those who wish to secure their power. While the idea of political intrigue and conspiracy may sound far-fetched to some, it is important to remember that the Tudor court was notorious for its dangerous power struggles. Elizabeth Elizabeth's death, while officially recorded as natural, is not beyond question. Could her passing have been part of a larger plot to reshape the course of English history? Was her death truly a tragic consequence of childbirth, or was it the result of political maneuvering and assassination? One of the most chilling aspects of Elizabeth's death is the potential cover-up. If her death was indeed the result of a conspiracy, then those responsible would have worked hard to ensure that it was seen as natural and unremarkable. In the dangerous world of Tudor politics, any hint of foul play could have led to a deadly power struggle. The secrecy surrounding Elizabeth's death could very well have been a carefully orchestrated effort to protect those who stood to gain from her demise. In the end, the mystery of Elizabeth of York's death remains unresolved. While the official record states that she died after childbirth complications, the possibility of a political plot or assassination cannot be ruled out. Her death, at a time of intense political rivalries and power struggles, may have been part of a larger scheme to secure the future of the Tudor dynasty. Whether Elizabeth was truly the victim of political treachery or simply a tragic casualty of her time, her death is one of the most enduring mysteries of the Tudor court. What is clear is that Elizabeth's death set the stage for the dramatic events that would unfold during the reign of her son, Henry VIII. Her passing left a void in the Tudor court, one that would be filled with intrigue, betrayal, and political maneuvering. Elizabeth's death, whether natural or the result of darker forces, played a pivotal role in shaping the future of England and the course of its history. Her story remains a powerful reminder of the dangers that lurked in the courts of Renaissance Europe and the lengths to which people would go to secure power. Queen Anne of France's death in 1522 might seem to be a straightforward medical issue, but was it really just a natural demise, or could there have been something more behind it? Anne, the wife of King Louis XII of France, died shortly after her husband in 1515, and the official cause of death was reported as a sudden illness. Yet the political climate of the time suggests that her death may have been part of a much larger and more orchestrated plan, possibly aimed at clearing the way for new alliances and shifting political dynamics within the French court. Anne of France's role was no small matter. She was an influential queen consort, well respected for her grace and diplomacy. However, her marriage to Louis XII was already politically charged, and following his death, the French court was filled with intrigue. This was a time when the survival of monarchies often depended not just on bloodlines but on strategic alliances and the ability to maintain power. As Anne's sudden death came so soon after the death of her husband, many began to speculate that her passing could have been more than just a case of illness. At the time of her death, France was at a pivotal moment. It had no male heirs, and his death left a power vacuum. His successor was Francis I, who had claims to the throne but needed to solidify his position. Was Anne's death, therefore, the result of a natural illness, or was there a more strategic reason behind it? Some have speculated that the rapidity of her demise and the timing of it raised more than a few eyebrows. Could Anne's death have been a political maneuver to make way for the new king, or to weaken any potential claimants to the throne? Adding to the mystery is the fact that Anne's sudden death happened after she had been involved in several court intrigues and had been maneuvering for power behind the scenes. She was married to Louis XII, and through that marriage, she had gained significant political influence. However, with the death of Louis XII, the dynamics of the French court began to shift, and the next move of the French monarchy was up for grabs. Could some factions within the court have seen Anne as an obstacle to these plans, particularly given her influence over her children and her ongoing power? The royal court during Anne's time was rife with political maneuvering, and the position of queen consort was not just ceremonial, it was a platform for tremendous influence. The potential for Anne's death to have been influenced by those seeking to cement their power is highly plausible. Many courts at the time employed assassination as a tool for securing the throne, and while the idea of poison is often the first thought, it's important to look at the bigger picture. Could Anne's sudden illness have been an engineered event that allowed certain powerful figures to shift the political balance in France? One of the most intriguing aspects of Anne's death is the timing of it. Her sudden decline from health was officially attributed to an illness, but the French court at the time was notorious for its deadly games of power. The idea that a sudden illness might have been used as a cover for a politically motivated death isn't far-fetched. Poisonings and other covert methods were not uncommon in royal courts, and Anne, like many women of her status, could have been a target for those who wished to gain influence. Anne's passing also left a vacuum in the court. Her children, while heirs to the throne, were still young, and the absence of their mother left them vulnerable. The struggle for influence and control in the wake of her death could have easily led to various political factions attempting to manipulate the situation for their own benefit. Was Anne's death, therefore, an unfortunate consequence of illness, or was it the result of an orchestrated plot to remove her as an obstacle to further power grabs? What makes this scenario even more intriguing is the fact that Anne's legacy was tied directly to the success of her family, and her death was a key moment in the reshaping of the French monarchy. The fact that such a prominent figure's death came under such suspicious circumstances points to the lengths to which some would go to ensure their positions at the top. Was Anne's death the result of an illness, or was it a strategic move designed to reshape the future of the monarchy? In conclusion, the mystery surrounding Queen Anne of France's death invites us to question the true nature of power during the Renaissance. It wasn't simply about who ruled, but who controlled the mechanisms of the court, the alliances, and the dynasties. Anne's death, whether natural or politically motivated, marked a turning point in French history. It's a reminder that during times of great political upheaval, even the most sudden and seemingly natural deaths may hide the designs of those who seek to alter the course of history. The death of Queen Anne may not have been an isolated incident, but part of the larger political landscape that saw power shift in dramatic ways. It may have been a simple medical tragedy, but given the political currents swirling in the French court, it's hard not to consider the possibility that it was something more. Anne's death remains one of the many enigmatic moments in Renaissance history, where the line between politics and mortality was often blurred. Was her death the result of an illness, or was it part of a well-orchestrated plan to change the fate of a nation? Queen Anne of France's death in 1522 has long been shrouded in mystery. While it was officially listed as a natural death following a sudden illness, some historians have questioned whether her passing was truly as innocent as it seemed. Why does her death raise so many questions, and could there have been deeper political forces at play? Let's explore the circumstances surrounding her demise and uncover the possibility that it may have been more than just an unfortunate health issue. Anne, the queen consort of Louis XII, was no ordinary royal. She was known for her intelligence, grace, and political acumen. When Louis XII passed away in 1515, Anne became a key figure in French politics. However, just a few years later, her own sudden illness and death raised eyebrows in the court. Was this a simple case of natural causes, or was something more sinister behind her untimely end? Anne's death came just after her husband's, and within a few short years of his passing, her health deteriorated rapidly. Officially, she was said to have succumbed to an illness, but the timing of her death left many wondering. He had been the primary political force in France following Louis XII's death, and some believed that her death could have been orchestrated to remove her as a significant figure in the court. With a new king on the horizon and the court rife with power struggles, it was not unusual for royal deaths to coincide with political maneuvering. What makes Anne's death even more suspicious is the political context of the time. France was in the midst of significant change after Louis XII's death. The succession of the throne was in question, and a power struggle had already begun within the French court. Anne, though widowed, was still a highly influential figure. Her children, who stood to inherit the throne, were still too young to take control, and Anne's political alliances were crucial. Could her sudden death have been the result of a move by factions within the court who sought to reshape the future of France? It's important to remember that during the Renaissance, royal courts were often filled with dangerous political intrigue. Even royal marriages, which may seem romantic or strategic in the public eye, could often involve backstabbing, betrayal, and covert alliances. In such a politically charged environment, the death of a powerful figure like Queen Anne was not always a natural occurrence. Some historians point out that Anne's sudden illness and death followed a series of tense political events. As the political factions within the court sought to realign their loyalties, Anne may have become a liability to those who hoped to gain more power. Could her death have been carefully timed to coincide with these shifts in political influence? Given the sheer importance of royal alliances and the necessity of maintaining power, it's not hard to imagine that some may have seen Anne's death as an opportunity to clear the path for other ambitions. Moreover, the fact that Anne's death was officially attributed to a sudden illness raises additional questions. Was her condition genuinely an illness, or could it have been something else? Could Anne have been poisoned or otherwise eliminated in a more subtle manner? At the time, poison was a well-known tool of assassination within royal circles, and many figures in the French court had enemies who were not afraid to resort to extreme measures to advance their positions. Could Anne's death have been engineered to benefit these enemies? The potential political motives behind Anne's death become even more intriguing when considering the fact that her children, while heirs to the throne, were not yet old enough to rule on their own. This left them vulnerable to the designs of others, and Anne's absence could have played a significant role in the reshaping of the French monarchy. Anne's death, therefore, a tragic consequence of illness, or was it an instrumental part of a larger political scheme to control the future of the French throne? It's also important to consider the role of court intrigues at the time. With Anne's death, a power vacuum emerged, with various factions vying for influence. While Anne had remained a central figure during the early days of her son's reign, it's possible that the political struggles of the time played a role in her sudden demise. Royal families were known to engage in covert alliances and betrayals, and with Anne's influence in the French court, she may have become a target for those seeking to advance their own political agendas. While there is no direct evidence to support the idea that Anne's death was a political assassination, the context surrounding her passing and the timing of it certainly raised doubts. In a world where power struggles were common and ruthless, could Anne's death truly have been an accident, or was it part of a larger, darker plan? In conclusion, Queen Anne's death remains one of the many enigmas of Renaissance history. The official narrative of her death as a natural illness does not fully account for the political intrigue surrounding her at the time. Was her death simply the result of poor health, or was it a calculated move to clear the way for those seeking to shift the balance of power in the French court? Anne's story serves as a reminder that even in royal circles, the line between life and death could be blurred by ambition, manipulation, and the desire for power. Whether it was illness or a conspiracy, Anne's death marked a turning point in French history, and its true nature may never be fully understood. Her death marked the end of a dynasty that had had once ruled Florence and had been one of the most powerful families in Italy during the Renaissance. But was it truly the end of an era, or was something more at play in her passing? While she died after a period of illness, some believe that her death may have been influenced by the very people closest to her, those who stood to gain from the Medici family's decline. The Medici family, long synonymous with wealth, power, and patronage of the arts, had seen their fortunes wane in the 18th century. Anna Maria Luisa was the last surviving member of the family, and her death came after she had devoted much of her life to preserving the Medici legacy. Her efforts to protect the family's art collections and estates were well known, and her passing brought an end to any remaining political power the family might have held. However, the circumstances surrounding her death remain unclear and raise questions about whether it was a simple natural death or part of a larger scheme to extinguish the Medici line once and for all. Anna Maria Luisa had been a prominent figure in preserving the Medici's treasures, but as her health deteriorated, so did her influence. Her efforts to maintain the family legacy were often met with resistance from various factions within Italy, as the power of the Medici had long since diminished. The question that many historians ask is whether Anna Maria Luisa's death was a natural consequence of old age, or if it was hastened by those around her, people who had a vested interest in ending the Medici legacy once and for all. It's fascinating to note that in the final years of her life, Anna Maria Luisa made a remarkable decision. She negotiated an agreement with the ruling powers of Florence, ensuring that the family's art collection and various treasures would remain in the city, untouched by foreign rulers. Act, while preserving the cultural heritage of the Medici, also ensured that the family's influence over Florence would end. But was this generosity truly her choice, or was it subtly influenced by others who saw the Medici's power as a threat to their own agendas? The Medici family had long been at the center of political intrigue. They had been involved in countless scandals, rivalries, and conspiracies, so it is not entirely out of the realm of possibility that Anna Maria Luisa's death was part of a larger political maneuver. Some historians suggest that her passing was not entirely due to natural causes. Was there a conspiracy to hasten her death in order to extinguish the family's legacy once and for all? It's an unsettling possibility, especially considering the political turmoil of the time and the rise of new powers that were eager to shift the balance of influence in Italy. Adds another layer of intrigue to Anna Maria Luisa's death is the fact that she had been in relatively good health up until the final months of her life. Some had speculated that her age played a part in her decline. The suddenness of her passing, coupled with the political backdrop of the time, raises questions. Could there have been foul play involved? Could she have been manipulated, either emotionally or physically, by those who wanted to control the Medici's legacy for their own benefit? The end of the Medici dynasty was a significant moment in European history. The family had been a key player in the Renaissance, fostering the arts, sciences, and literature. The death of Anna Maria Luisa seemed to mark the end of an era, but it is precisely this moment of transition that invites further speculation. As the last Medici, she had the power to shape the future of Florence, yet her death allowed a new power structure to take hold. Some believe that the political forces surrounding her may have seen her as an obstacle to their ambitions, and that her passing may have been the culmination of a larger effort to ensure the Medici family was no longer a threat. It's worth considering the broader context of Italy during the 18th century. The country was fragmented, with various states and factions vying for control, and Florence was no exception. The Medici family's decline had left a vacuum of power, and many saw the end of Anna Maria Luisa as an opportunity to secure their position. Whether her death was a result of natural causes or political machinations, the impact on Florence was profound. The Medici legacy, built over centuries, was irreversibly altered by her passing, and the city would never be the same. While some might argue that the end of the Medici family was inevitable, the fact that Anna Maria Luisa died under circumstances that remain suspicious makes her death all the more intriguing. The true story behind her passing may never be fully understood, but the questions it raises about the nature of political power, manipulation, and legacy are ones that resonate throughout history. In conclusion, Anna Maria Luisa de' Medici's death was not just the end of an individual life, but the conclusion of an era. The Medici family's influence on art, culture, and politics in Italy had been vast, and her passing marked the definitive end of their reign. However, the mystery surrounding her death and the possible manipulation by those around her adds a layer of complexity to this historical moment. Was her death a natural consequence of age and illness, or was it part of a larger, darker plot? The answers may remain elusive, but the intrigue surrounding her passing is a testament to the enduring power of the Medici name and the legacy they left behind. If you enjoyed this epic journey, please subscribe to our channel for more thrilling historical tales. Don't miss out on new videos. Hit the notification bell to stay updated.